Good afternoon, everybody, from a very sunny Blackpool. We're going to tell you, read you a few stories with a travel interest in them. There's only two of us today, myself, David Kirby, and my wife, Sylvia, and we'll read you some stories. The first one I want to read you is about cruising. More and more of us are cruising these days, so the title was in the Times, I think, yes. I loved my £86 cruise. The food is good, the beds are fantastic. Plus Costa fares are an absolute steal, says Julia Buckley. Lining up outside the port of Savona in the northwest of Italy, I wondered if maybe the Americans did have a point. I had booked a cruise with what the US community seems to agree, if you read reviews, is the world's worst cruise line, and it was starting badly. First, a website that refused to complete the obligatory online check-in. Second, the phone lines that were closed at the weekend. And finally, the sweaty arrival at the port, where a security guard refused to let me through without a boarding pass, but confirmed there was no way for me to get one. But I'll miss the cruise, I wailed. He shrugged, he didn't care. Maybe I should have listened to the Americans. But then I did what most Italians would do. I breezily crossed to another line where the guard smiled at his colleagues, smiled and told me this always happens with Costa cruises. He checked my name and waved me through. First lesson on an Italian cruise with a vast majority of guests that are Italian. You need to channel your Italianita. I'm part Italian and lived in Italy, so I should probably have anticipated all this. Oh yes, Costa Cruises, the world's worst cruise line of all, according to AOL, which was aggregated customers' reviews earlier this year. The lowest rated line on the cruise review, says Cruise Critic. The worst cruise line I have ever gone on, according to one irate person on Reddit, who seemed to speak for the majority of the English speakers. Costa certainly had a bad reputation. Hidden extras, non-stop announcements, sanctioned balcony smoking being the main complaints. But it also, of course, had a very real reason for mistrust. In 2012, 32 people died when the captain of the Costa Concordia sunk his ship off the coast of Tuscany. He is now in jail, by the way. Yet, when I saw a 3-day cruise on sale for €99, or about £86 last winter, I wondered, how bad can this be? 2 nights from Savona to Barcelona via Marseille in a single balcony cabin, full board. It was almost cheaper than staying at home. I booked it, even for the anecdotal stories that I could tell, if nothing else. The ship was the Costa Toscana, the newest in the fleet, the 13th largest ship in the world. It can accommodate nearly 6,500 passengers, which explained my ship-filling deal, but also sounded like my agoraphobic nightmare. There's only one cruise I've liked enough to repeat book, Virgin Voyages, whose ships have a maximum capacity of 2,860. Several days before departure, I received my cabin allocation, a balcony on deck 5, as low down the ship as you can go in that category. You get what you pay for. It felt dark and claustrophobic, and once we set sail, waves boomed against the hull. Luckily for me, fate intervened. I left the balcony door open as I went for a wander and returned to find the cabin stinking of cigarette smoke. Thanks, neighbours, as I'm an asthmatic. I asked the customer services desk about changing the sheets. Instead, they kindly moved me to deck 14. The difference was vast, with regular floor-to-ceiling windows opening onto the balcony. My cabin was suddenly a joy. The Toscana sketch design isn't for everybody. Think La Dolce Vita on steroids. But I love the nautical blue and white stripes, burnt orange sofa, and despite a large number of children on board, Costa lets them travel free, by the way. It was quiet, comfortable too. The beds are Dorolan, a fancy Italian brand. 2 days isn't enough to get to know the ship, let alone a big ship. But sliding past slowly moving families, I found my favourite spots. The skywalk is a track looping across the top deck, a great viewpoint for when you're entering port. But I preferred the walkway around Deck 8, which traces the perimeter of the ship. While families colonise the indoor pool, older couples the solarium, I preferred the empty top-deck lounges and swinging chairs. For Brits, the problem with Costa is cultural, more than anything else. The Toscana is big enough for you easily to find your place. The Aperol and Campari bars, the adults-only area on Deck 7, perhaps even the world's worst cruise, has something to offer. But the ship's theatre, an amphitheatre that looks fantastic, but doesn't have a single decent view in the house. No great loss because the entertainment looked pretty dire also. You can dodge the smokers up here, but you can't dodge children stampeding along the corridors or chaos on the buffet because everything is line skipping. Having said that, speaking English means that you can skip the crowds when it comes to the induction and disembarkation talks. While hundreds of Italians swarmed into the auditorium, the 20-odd English speakers sat with Marcin, an excellent Anglo host, who explained the ship's procedures and even delivered an hour lecture on Costa's history, which the geek in me adored. Yeah. Speciality dining, it turns out, is the way to enjoy the Toscana. The chaos at the free restaurants pushed me to the paid-for pizzeria on night 2, purely because it was deserted. Imagine my shock when I was served up a top-notch Neapolitan pizza. But then the food was excellent everywhere. The buffet was pure Italianata, super fresh salad, cold cuts, cheeses, grilled swordfish, super daily pasta choices. Yeah, the coffee was extra, and no, it wasn't worth it. Yeah, the water machines were painfully slow, but the food itself and the terraces that turned the buffet into alfresco trattoria were great. If I'm sounding like a grudging convert, you'd be right. Yes, those famous Costa extras reared their heads. A 15% alcohol tax on a glass of wine, a daily £9.50 a head service charge added to my bill. But my final cabin was lovely, and reading in the sun overlooking the Marseille Gulf of Lion was spectacular. It was a spectacular use of a winter weekend as well. In fact, call it Stockholm Syndrome. But I ended up booking another Costa cruise, believe it or not, before I disembarked. You get what you pay for. The Americans say about Costa, and I'd agree, it's like Ryanair. A low headline price adds add-ons if you want, but you can keep that rock-bottom fare if you say so. And in this economy, isn't that what we all need?
Hi, this is Sylvia Kirby, and I'm going to go give you some history. The Great British Holiday and how it all began. From Elizabeth's spa retreats and Victorian seaside escapes to Butlin's package deals and the rise of budget airlines. Annabel thought she's a travel writer and author of a new book, The Great Escape, exploring 400 years of British holidays. In 1562, a physician had a belief that more than 60 ailments could be soothed by bathing in mineral-rich spring waters was the first step towards what we now consider a holiday. A reason to travel and a place to visit that offered benefits and experiences not found at home. Royal approval followed when Elizabeth I visited Bath, and declared the hot springs extraordinary healing powers, and they're available to all those who could afford it. And in 1573, Mary Queen of Scots became a regular visitor to St Anne's, well in Buxton, to take the cure for her rheumatism. Their visits formed the blueprint for the spa holiday as we know it today. By the 18th century, wealthy young men were embarking on grand tours of Europe, visiting cultural capitals including Florence, Rome and Venice. The trips gave birth to the modern souvenir, with paintings and statues and trinkets to be shipped home after their holiday. In 1844, Queen Victoria and Prince Albert made a visit to the Highlands, staying at Blair Castle, with meals, walks and entertainment arranged for them so they could relax. It offered an early version of the modern fly and flop escape. Their visit was the start of a love affair with the Highlands that the royal family still have today. The couple returned twice more before taking a lease on Balmoral Castle in 1848. Victoria's delight in the region and the sense of retreat is offered, and this was echoed by Queen Elizabeth II, who honeymooned at Balmoral and spent every summer there, and in September 2022 she passed away there, and this was the thought of holidays in Scotland. In 1702, a physician also with the history of cold bathing that seawater could cure everything from leprosy, deafness. Unlike spa waters, sea bathing was open to everyone. Dukes and duchesses might find themselves bathing alongside local fishermen or shopkeepers and their families. Coastal towns began attracting visitors, drawn by fresh air, health and seawater. The spa town of Scarborough, as well as the Downateel fishing villages in Sussex, soon became what we know as Brighton and Margate on the Kent coast. But seaside holidays remain largely the preserve of the wealthy until the arrival of the railways. Once 18th century visitors arrived at the seaside, they could make use of new bathing machines, dragged by horses to the water's edge, where two people known as dippers waited thigh deep in water to chivvy their charges into the sea. Working as a dipper was a skilled job in those days. Martha Gunn, Brighton's Queen of the Dippers, became a well-known figure in their own right. Martha would have been able to read the wind and the clouds and the sea, and she must have had excellent people skills, because all the well-born women insisted on seeing her for their holiday. The change in the town's fortunes brought her wealth, so much so that her portrait is given pride of place in Brighton Museum. The Rail Revolution. On 27th of September 1825, George Stephenson's steam-powered locomotion slowly chugged out of Shildon Station in County Durham, with 600 passengers crammed into the coal wagons, and a whole new method of escape rattled and clanked its way over the horizon. Long stretches of shoreline that had been isolated and unreachable were suddenly connected to the world. The trains carried thousands of people. That meant food and lodgings and donkey rides and alehouses, new jobs, new wealth, and for part of the year, a whole new way of life. Did you know that Thomas Cook was a real person? As a young wood-turner, he arranged an excursion for 500 members of the South Midland Temperance Association in 1841, which was such a success that he began to organise trips further afield, inadvertently inventing a role that would become an integral part of our modern holiday industry, the travel agent. At a time when rail travel still felt unfamiliar and intimidating to many, Cook offered reassurance as well as adventure, expanding his tours across the Channel in 1855, creating a business which would evolve for the more than 150 years. Good morning, campers. It was Harry Warner, a retired military captain, who created an early version of the all-inclusive resort, Warner Holiday Camp. It opened in 1932, offering 4-course meals, a bar, entertainment. His friend and fellow board member was called Billy Butlin. He opened his rival camp in Skegness in 1936. 2 years later, the Holidays with Pay Act gave millions of workers paid annual leave, creating a vast new market for affordable holidays. Butlin's success was immediate. One advert in the Daily Express generated 10,000 queries, and the resort was instantly booked out for the whole of the summer. For the next 2 decades, Butlins dominated the holiday camp market, and its mother and daughter beauty contests, knobbly knees competitions, and enthusiastic redcoats. By 1966, there were 9 resorts around the UK, welcoming 1 million holidaymakers each summer. The weekenders, for most who toiled in factories, pits and mills, escape from everyday life, might amount to little more than 1 or 2 days a year. But the Factory Act of 1850 helped establish the idea of a Saturday half-day. Gradually, a new routine emerged. Chores would be done on Saturday afternoons, leaving Sunday for a bit of what the middle and upper classes had come to define as leisure time. The weekend began to take shape, along with the radical idea that time off might create a healthy, happy workforce. In May 1950, Horizon Holidays set up, and it took its first group of holidaymakers from Gatwick to Corsica on a repurposed warplane. This was the first of the package holidays accessible to working people. Passengers paid £32 each, around £1,400 today, for 6-hour return flights with a refuelling stop in Lyon, with 2 weeks' accommodation under canvas with meals in open-air dining rooms. And this was the start of our affordable holidays. When Ryanair took off in 1985 with just 15 passengers on board, it was the beginning of a budget airline revolution that would really take hold over the EU-approved a new open skies policy in 1992. Relaunching itself as Europe's first low-cost airline, Ryanair was followed by a spate of companies, which meant it often cost less to fly to Rome for the weekend than hop on a train from London to the seaside. And this was the start of the holiday season.
Thank you, Sylvia. I'm going to read you an interesting story, interesting for me, and I hope for you as well. In the past, we've been a few times. It's a very easy holiday for a weekend break or a bit longer to Nice in the south of France. You can go from Liverpool or Manchester. It's very cheap. But when you get there, it's a super place. So this article is called Nice One or Nice One, and it's about the Negresco Hotel, a fantastic hotel on the Prom. I've been lucky enough to eat in the restaurant, but not wealthy enough to stay there. But let's read a story all about its history and its eccentric backstory that goes with it. The Negresco is to fancy Riviera hotels of the Belle Epoque what the Matterhorn is to mountains, an archetype, an ideal. There are other fine specimens of comparable kind, hotels that are grander in the way there may be mountains that are higher, yet this is the one. The blinding white Beaux Arts facade of Negresco with delicious, slightly lurid duck-egg blue accents and its name spelt out in capitals across its pink-tiled dome looms as brightly over the glittering sweep of the Promenade des Anglais as the Matterhorn does over the Alps. Architectural historians, guidebooks writers and journalists have often likened that famous dome to a breast. In fact, it's a shape of more like that of a bell jar. And I imagine that there are many of the millions of passers-by who have glanced up the Negresco's dome over the past 100 years with wondered what was beneath it. Now, for the first time, you can see for yourself, because what previously was the owner's private apartment has been transformed into the hotel's new premier suite. The Negresco was created by and took its name from Alexander Negrescu, an ambitious, exceptionally charming Romanian. As a manager at several of the top restaurants in Paris, Monaco and Nice, he became acquainted with some of the grandest figures of the age. One of these was a French industrialist, Alexandre Darac, who provided the financial backing that enabled Negrescu to realise his dream of opening a Riviera hotel. The architect was engaged with a brief to create a 400-room hotel of unmatched magnificence. As a connoisseur of the frothy and frolicsome, the Moulin Rouge and the Folies Bergère were his. He was absolutely the right man for the job. Construction began in 1911 and was completed 15 months later. For a brief, marvellous moment, the Negresco was a hit, packed with European royalty, international high rollers. During the First World War, the hotel was used as a military hospital. Negrescu subsequently went bust and died in 1920. So then the hotel changed hands several times over the following decades. By the mid-50s, it was a shadow of its former self. Then along came Madame. Gilles Aguirre was the only child of a pork butcher turned property developer from Brittany. And in 1957, recently married, she encouraged her parents to buy the Negresco. Her mother's spine had been permanently damaged in a botched surgery, and the hotel lift was the only one in France large enough to take her wheelchair. This clinched the deal. From the onset, Jeanne, addressed as Madame by the staff, whom she both coddled and terrified, took a hands-on role in the management of the Negresco, particularly in terms of interior design. Her husband, Paul Aguirre, a lawyer, took care of his business side of things. Madame's redecoration of Negresco amounted to a reinvention. She filled it with art. Its public spaces, rooms and corridors were adorned with 6,000 pieces, paintings, sculptures and furniture. These represented 5 centuries of French creativity. From the early 21st century, highlights include one of 3 ceremonial portraits of Louis XIV, component parts several 17th and 18th century chateaux, including entire forests worth of boiseries and monuments, a 10-ton fireplace, a baccarat chandelier comprising 16,800 crystals, commissioned by Tsar Nicholas, and hundreds of drawings and paintings by Picasso, Degas, Watteau, Chagall. The vivacity and variety of the art are matched by those of the decor. Madame rejected the actual prevalent browns of the day, greens and burgundies, in favour of life-affirming Great Barrier Reef palette of electric blue, lemon, yellow, crimson and emerald, executed in the finest materials by top French artisans and suppliers. We are used to art hotels these days, but they didn't exist when Madame set about transforming the Negresco. Though uneven, not everything in the hotel is a masterpiece. Her collection amounts to a lucid and heartfelt expression of her personal taste, as well as a showcase of what the French Ministry of Culture refers to as an enterprise du patrimoine vivant, a living heritage company. In short, the hotel possesses one of a kind of authenticity, as flamboyant, unsubtle and strangely endearing as Madame, who in her personal style and forthright manner was not a million miles from Dame Edna Everage. Her paw prints are everywhere, alongside those of her Sharper, Lilou, her Yorkshire Terrier, Lily, and her marmalade moggy Carmen. I love animals, she declared. They are the brothers, sisters and children I never had. The Negresco was soon a magnet for the jet set. Creative types in particular adored it. None more than the immortal Spanish soprano Montserrat Caballé, who stayed for more than 500 nights. Madame was forever rebuffing offers to buy the hotel. Bill Gates reportedly wrote her a blank cheque and even invited her to insert the amount she liked. My soul has no price, she snorted. Madame died in 2019 at the age of 95. There has been a number of developments at Negresco since then. Notably, the redesign of the carousel-themed La Rotonda restaurant. There has been a gentler glow up the exquisite Michelin-starred Le Chantelet helmet by the brilliant Virginie Basselot, the addition of a superb spa and beach club, and most recently the creation of the new Jean and Paul penthouse suite under the dome. I approached the two-bedroomed, 400-square-metre suite with an open mind. I wasn't disappointed. Floor-to-ceiling 18th century bookcase stacked with period-appropriate books, satisfying clattery parquet floors, a big, fat, juicy Rubens over the fireplace, plus a lateral space. The suite spreads out along the hotel's sea-facing axis with 3 outdoor terraces. Perhaps as the Matterhorn, the only thing better than gazing up at Negresco's dome is gazing down from it. Inside, the electrism that defines the rest of the hotel expresses itself once more alongside grotto posters, lovely, beautiful sculptures behind Baroque nymphs and tapestries. All in all, it is utterly glorious and rather dialed down compared to many of the hotel's existing suites. The Marie Antoinette suite, for instance, goes to 11. This one hovers high miles above this. Certain other developments at Madame's death have been less cheerful, as reported in the Times in 2024. A stranger-than-fiction legal dispute has arisen around the ownership and management of Negresco. In 2009, Madame set up an endowment to preserve the hotel's independence and to support the causes that cared for her most deeply: French artistry, vulnerable people and animal welfare. Despite her best intentions, Madame left behind not only a spectacular hotel, but also a degree of legal confusion. The case, as they say, continues, and so, thank goodness, at the moment does Negresco. I'd just like to say, though, that a guest in the cheapest bed and breakfast double is £303, but the suite that I have just described to you is £26,000 per night. If you can afford it, lovely. But it is a fabulous hotel. Over to Sylvia.
Before I read the next article, I thought I'd mention a very interesting book that you can listen to, and it's called A Sense of the World Tells the Story of James Holman, a blind man who travelled the world in the early 19th century. Author Jason Roberts came across this story almost by accident in a library. He found a small book with a short chapter on a man who went blind at 25, but refused to give up control of his life. And Robert tells the story of Scott Simon, what he learnt in researching, writing this book. A Sense of the World, it's called, and how a blind man became history's greatest traveller, And as I say, you can get it to listen to. I thought that might be quite interesting for you. The article, I've been to every country in the world. Sue Rogers set herself the challenge of visiting every country on the planet and says it's been an incredible journey. More people have been to space than have been to all 193 countries in the world recognised by the UN. Sue Rogers is the only British-born woman to have done so. The most of her globe-trotting done since turning 60. At the age of 72, she is now one of the top 100 travellers in the world. She says, I've driven across deserts, communed with thousands of emperor penguins in South Georgia, sampled rat on a stick in Laos. I went on a camel safari in Kenya, spent the night out in the open in a sleeping bag, which wasn't wildly comfortable. In the world's smallest island nation, in Micronesia, the only available accommodation was half-demolished hotel, so I was woken every morning by a big vibrating hammer. When I was 46, in 2000, I began working for myself as an educational consultant and freelance Ofsted inspector. I'd formerly been a school head teacher, which made it easier to manage my time in a way that enabled more travel. In 2013, I listed the countries I'd already visited and thought, oh my goodness, I've done more than I imagined. From there, my travels became much more checklisted to my UN-recognised list of 193 countries. I added Kosovo, Taiwan, the Vatican, for a total of 196 that I needed to visit. I thought about what I could do on my own and what looked a bit scary, which would require guided tours. I started to go on 5 or 6 trips a year, mostly on my own, and partly because others weren't interested, and partly because it's a more immersive experience when you're alone. There have been many hairy moments. I fell off a waterfall in Venezuela and ended up in plaster. I had my appendix out in Nepal. And then Princess Anne on the same trip in Mali, I had to be rescued by the army, clutching AK-47s after my car broke down. It turned out that I shouldn't have gone down that road at all, because the militant group Boko Haram had kidnapped people there a few days before. On Christmas Island, I was attacked by a booby bird. I got too close to a baby that I didn't spot nesting in the coral. So its mother lashed out. I felt hurt, my legs, and lost my car keys. There was nobody around, so I rang the police. They were very good and took me to hospital, hunted down my car keys. The next day, I got a flat tyre in a jungle. I was too embarrassed to call them again. I just kept driving. That wasn't the only time an incensed animal caused chaos on the Cocos Islands. A guy was travelling and was attacked by a reef shark. They thought he might lose his leg. At one point, they managed to stitch it up. I avoided swimming there. Mostly, though, it's been a pleasure. Some places are quite spiritual, like Machu Picchu and the Taj Mahal. I always feel this distinctive atmosphere on top of mountains and beaches. Once in the Galapagos Islands, I found hammocks on the rooftop of our hotel, and I was drinking beer watching pelicans sweeping over the bay. It felt so balmy and tropical and just lovely. Of course, not every destination is so idyllic. North Korea was interesting, but I felt on edge the whole time. It was like being in the Truman Show. You have a visit on an authorised tour. Absolutely nothing is real. They've got shops with window displays that are empty inside. They take you to factories supposedly producing biscuits and bottles that don't actually work. The whole experience felt very uncomfortable. The main tourist hotel is on an island that you can't leave. There are stories about the 5th floor being just for surveillance. because there are no buttons for that one. The final country on my list was Afghanistan, which I visited in October 2023, joined by 4 friends I'd met travelling. I'm always in two minds when I go to places like that, as whether you're supporting the regime. I was furious about the Taliban, and while I was there had just to stay quiet. But it was one of the most memorable trips, starkly beautiful, with glacial blue rivers and dusty mountains and some of the world's most hospitable people. I have lots of favourite countries, Bolivia, the Solomon Islands, and I'm drawn to tropical spots. India always lures me back. I've been 10 times. I relive my travels by writing about them. You can go on my blog, suetravels.com. My journeys aren't just international. I'm also currently visiting every English country. People's reactions vary when they hear that I've been to every country in the world. Often there is just doubt or confusion. They say, "What? Even this one?" And I say, "Yes, all of them." Some people just don't see the appeal. They think I'm mad or suggest that it's a waste of money. I think it's usually important to have a goal, a challenge, something to work towards, especially since I fully retired. I've done most of this since I turned 60, due to having more time and more money. It has been expensive, so I've had to make sacrifices. I started off with a 3-bedroom flat in London. I've repeatedly downsized to free up funds. Now I live in a 1-bedroom flat in Brighton. It's a life choice. I didn't have children, so I spend all my money on travel. I've had other challenges to navigate. I suffer from a chronic condition which causes pain and fatigue. It comes and goes, and I've found ways to ensure that it doesn't derail my travels. For example, I'm not able to walk far. I'll hire a car. Sometimes I get tired. I just have to pace myself when I'm plotting on itinerary. You also need to consider fundamentals like crossing the international date line and losing a day. You don't want to risk missing flights. My goal is to encourage solo travel, particularly amongst older women. You don't know what is possible unless you try. I used to be terrified of driving in the UK, let alone on the other side of the road while balancing the GPS on my knee. But the more you do something, the less scary it becomes, and your confidence blossoms. I encourage you to have a goal in life and fulfill it, whatever it may be.
My next story from David is another cruise story with a totally different slant on this. It's called Reach for the Stars. A man called Dom Tullett joins an astronomy cruise from Chile to Peru to see if Spielberg was really right about extraterrestrial life. From my portside cabin on the ship Vega, I phoned home to wish my children good night. More than 7,000 miles separated us. I told them about the snow-covered Andes outside the plane window, my onward bus from Santiago to Valparaiso on Chile's Pacific coast, my excitement exploring the ship and the first day of my cruise. This, for me, was a voyage rooted in nostalgia. Nearly half a century ago, Steven Spielberg instilled in me, like many other kids of the 70s and 80s, a sense of wonder about the cosmos and the idea that we might not be alone in the universe, with his film Close Encounters of the Third Kind in 1977 and E.T. in 1982. Spielberg had looked to the stars with hope, suggesting that a friendly civilization might be out there. This summer, the director is back in sci-fi mode with his new blockbuster, Disclosure Day, which supposes that alien contact has already been made. It charts the battle to share that information with the public. Leading the way in the real-life search for alien life is the SETI, Search for Extraterrestrial Intelligence Institute, a US-led scientific body with close links to NASA. Swanolinik has partnered with the SETI Institute, bringing senior scientists on board several 2026 cruises on routes ranging from South America to the Arctic. On my 9-night cruise from Chile to Peru was Dr. James Boozer, a SETI research scientist with a PhD in astronomy. By day he hosted lectures in the ship's observation lounge, telling mesmerised passengers about the wonders of the universe or the science and history behind the search for alien life. By night he took us to stargazing to the deck to guide us in a tour of the heavens, identifying individual stars and constellations above us. Claiming to have the clearest skies on the planet, Chile is one of the best places from which to observe the cosmos. Chile has almost 50% of the astronomical infrastructure of the entire world. Dr. Boozer told us. He said that there are more than 300 cloudless days a year, and the lack of light pollution provides us with an ideal condition to watch the stars. Eager to make the most of those conditions, I had booked on a shore excursion to venture into the Atacama Desert, where many of these deep space telescopes are housed. However, the Antofagasta port officials decided that the sea conditions were far too rough. Our gateway to the Atacama was sadly blocked. Instead, we were treated to an exceptional view of the night sky from the Viga's upper deck. I scanned for familiar formations, but saw little I recognised on this southern sky. Dr. Boozer pointed out Orion, appearing upside down, and the Southern Cross, which is not visible from most of the Northern Hemisphere. It is a common line that there are more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on Earth. This seems incredible. That's not even close. There are as many as 1 septillion stars out there. That's a trillion with 24 zeros after the 1. The majority will have planets orbiting them. That's a lot of places that could hold life. SETI's work centres around the framework equation drawn up by the Institute's first president, the astronomer Dr. Frank Drake. The purpose of Drake equation was to stimulate scientific discussion. It suggested that the number of communicative civilizations in our galaxy could be calculated by determining the range of factors, such as the number of stars, how many planets each star has, the fraction of those that have the potential to host life, and the proportion of life forms that become capable of communication. Many of these factors are not known. The Drake equation poses more questions than answers, but SETI scientists are working on it. The comfort of my stateroom bed and the earthy colours of my living area tempted me to lounge long in my bathrobe and slippers each morning, pondering these massive questions, losing myself in the view of the ocean from my private balcony. The communal areas of the ship, wide open space, flooded with natural light and constant views of the sea. I started each day with a swim on the aft deck, the infinity pool, watching shearwaters and petrels skim low over the ship's wake. Being careful to replace any lost calories, I made up the most of the meal times with vast breakfast buffets, to the evening's fine dining. Throughout, it was never far from a Chilean pale ale or a chilled pisco sour. Between eating and lectures, my fellow passengers and I searched for signs of terrestrial life. We were an international cast, a strong contingent of Brits and Americans, rounded out with Canadians, Australians, Russians, and a couple of Brazilians. Most were in the mid-50-70 age range, with a youthful inquisitiveness and a taste for adventure. We followed the onboard naturalist Sue Walsh. As she prowled the decks, binoculars in hand, she watched for waterspouts of passing whales, pointed out the difference between sea lions and seals, identified the species of dolphins that played at the bow. Dolphins sit near the top of the animal intelligence rankings. Their communicative evidence is heightened with brain function, but it is limited to the waters they swim in. It is estimated that as many as 5 million species have existed on Earth since life began here. Of those, only one, Homo sapien, has managed to send a message out into the stars. For every one species that has a chance of communicating to us from its own world, there might be 5 million that cannot. I asked Dr. Boozer what would happen if contact were made. SETI does not have protocols for such an event. The first steps would be to verify the signal with colleagues across the globe to eliminate all other possibilities, he told me. Scientific collaboration is critical. Then it's in the hands of the governments, and that this is where Disclosure Day picks up the threads. Stopping at 5 ports between Valparaiso and Lima, Bega's shore excursions provided an insight into the land we were flanking, featuring tours including pisco tasting in Combine, a train ride into Chile's fertile valleys, and a tour of Peru's volcanic ridges. Other excursions carried an additional cost. I took to the air for the flight over Peru's famous Nazca lines. About 2,000 years ago, the Nazca people created enormous geoglyphics in the flat red earth. These neat curves and lines, some stretching more than 100 metres from end to end, form representations of the creatures of which the Nazca shared their world. Monkeys, spiders, hummingbirds, whales. What prompted them to create these geoglyphs is still unknown, but what is certain is that the images were not designed to be viewed from the ground level. They were meant for higher eyes. The final element of the Drake equation is time. For how long is a civilization able to communicate? The universe is more than 10 billion years old. We have been sending messages to potential listeners since 1974, just 52 years. In more than 10 billion, if an alien civilization had slipped into extinction just a century ago, it would have all been missed. So is there anything out there in promoting Disclosure Day? Spielberg has spoken of his belief that Earth is not the only planet to harbour life. Dr. Boozer does not disagree. It's inconceivable, I think, that there is not life anywhere else in the universe. All those zeros suggest the chances are high. But is that life intelligent? Can it send messages to Earth? And if it does come, will we still be there to receive it?
I have an article about Bear Grylls, a TV presenter and former SAS officer, on responsible travel, comfort zones and exploring the world on his doorstep. Tell us about your earliest memory of travel. My first real travel experience was going down to Dartmoor National Park in southern Devon with my dad. We went horse riding and wild camping, but it was winter and I was only 6 and was absolutely frozen. I remember my dad saying to me, "It's okay, sometimes you've just got to put your head down and get through the storms, because what's on the other side is amazing." He was an ex-Royal Marine Commando and taught me so much about the resilience of the human spirit and being adventurous. Adventure always starts inside yourself. It's not just about your surroundings, it's about living with your mind wide open and with a gratitude for life. You're an expert at coaxing others out of their comfort zones. What takes you out of yours? He says, "I'm not sure. I particularly love the getting there bit of travel. despite having done so much flying for work over the years. So I wouldn't say I'm a great traveller, but I do still try and visit new destinations as much as possible. In that sense, I spend most of my life out of my comfort zone. I think of it as more of a comfort pit, somewhere you want to get out of as quickly as possible. Another question, any top travel tips? He says, I always try to travel without expectation. Adventure only happens when things start to go wrong. You should stay nimble, expect the unexpected, and be sure to keep a sense of humour, whatever happens. The next question, what's your favourite place to explore in the UK? My number one would always be Wales. There's so much to it, incredible coasts, mountains, caves, waterfalls. My family own a little island a few miles off the coast of North Wales that's totally off-grid. The house is powered by wind and solar. We even collect rainwater off the roof. It can be very isolating, but I love it. I spend so much of my year around people, and I'm not a natural extrovert. I need a little quiet time to sit and recharge. The next question, how can people be encouraged to travel more responsibly? It's all about setting an example. You've got to try and make responsible living an aspiration. The world is a gift to us to be experienced, but we always have to temper that with a love and respect for the places we go. People are savvy now. They want to travel with companies that are socially responsible, and you'd hope that the adventure travel industry responds to that. After all, if you love something, a certain culture or environment, you should want to protect it. The next question, you have a new collaboration with Brompton, which seems an unlikely partnership, an adventurer and a commuter biker. How did this come about? He says, I've ridden Brompton's bikes all my life, so this partnership is something that's been brewing for a long time. I travel a lot, but despite appearances, it's not all jungles, deserts and mountains. The rest of the year is spent in cities, at conferences and conventions or events. But I find being tied to cars and taxis in big cities quite confining. So I always take my bike, arriving in a place you don't know. It's great to have such an easy way to get about and just explore. It really plays in that adventure of my mind. What's next on your travel list? The more I travel, the more I realise how truly incredible this world is. But sometimes the best adventures are on your own doorstep. I thought I knew every inch of the Brecon Beacons now, but last night I was camping at the Brecon Beacons with some old friends, and we found this amazing hidden ravine and its own waterfall. It was like something out of Narnia. I had no idea it was there. The reality is that you don't have to save a fortune and travel halfway across the world. You can go to your local places, open your eyes or ears, and experience new places on a weekend or an evening. You've just got to use your imagination. Bear Grylls is best known for presenting shows such as Born Survivor and Running Wild with Bear Grylls. He has led several record-breaking expeditions in the aid of charity and has held the position of Chief Scout of the United Kingdom and the Overseas Territories since 2009. The Brompton by Bear Grylls Sea Line Explore bike is also available if you're interested on brompton.com.
That's the stories for you today from Kirkham and Rural Fylde Rotary Club. So I hope you found something of interest, and we'll wish you a goodbye from myself, David.
And goodbye. Thank you.
Thank you all for listening. Bye.